In this edition of the Talking Toughness podcast series, we welcome Paul Taylor, a former British Royal Navy aircraft officer. Paul is an exercise physiologist, nutritionist and neuroscientist who is currently completing a PhD in applied psychology, where he's developing and testing resilience strategies with the Australian Defence Science Technology Group and the University of Newcastle. Paul is the founder and director of the Mind, Body, Brain Performance Institute, where he delivers resilience, leadership and executive performance programs for an impressive array of global organisations. His latest venture is the Resilient Mind, an online programming app that is currently used by a number of corporations and has proven benefits for resilience and mental well-being of participants. Paul, in fact, runs his own podcast series where we've been guests, so today we turn the tables on it.
The way I always position it is that the brain/mind is the master controller of the body. Right? It controls everything that goes on in your body, or most things that go on in your body, but it is completely dependent on the health of the body for its functioning. And if the body is not in great health, the brain is not going to be in great health either, and is not going to function well.
Yeah, you go to that well and say, I need this to be able to manage, and it's empty.
Correct.
You're going to have a hard time.
You're kind of taking me to the edge of my comfort zone in terms of knowledge. I come from a different background. I actually, first of all, studied biochemistry, but switched to economics. And my interest was, why do people behave the way they do when there are so-called economic systems that should work? And the economists tell us, if you do something to the system at one point, you should get a result at another. But it doesn't work like that. People mess those systems up.
Yeah, and interesting, particularly when you come to human behavior. Economics plays a huge role in human behavior. So, and particularly something called temporal discounting, or hyperbolic discounting. So what we know is that our brains are more attracted to threats and rewards that are clear and present. So they're immediate, they're within our grasp, and they discount threats and rewards that are off in the future. And this plays out on an absolute daily basis when it comes to our health. So most people, when you ask them, would they like to be healthy? They say, yes, they'd like to be healthy. They'd like to exercise that day. They'd like to eat well, maybe have an alcohol-free day. And then you walk past the cake shop, right? And that visual sight of those cakes. And for me, cheesecake is the one that does it. But if you've had a prior experience with cheesecake, as soon as you clock that cheesecake, dopamine is released in your brain. Now, a lot of people say dopamine is about pleasure. That's not 100% correct. It's involved in pleasure, but it's more about goal-directed behavior and motivation. So it actually goes, cheesecake, we like cheesecake, go and get the cheesecake, right? And at the same time, I'm thinking, no, but I'm trying to be healthy. And your brain is actually going, yeah, but you could be dead tomorrow. So go and get the cheesecake. So this is why health behavior change is particularly difficult if you're thinking about, I want to be healthy in the future. I don't want to have chronic disease, because that's really far off and your brain will discount the value of that. And then you're faced with all of these everyday temptations that actually trigger dopamine and goal-directed behavior in our brain. So behavioral economics, I'm fascinated by it when it comes to human behavior.
Well, I was doing my degree in economics, and we did a little project with in a department store in Wolverhampton. It was the big department store, and they had a haberdashery department. You don't have those anymore because people don't make their own clothes, which is another topic. But they used to sell fabric, and this store was having trouble shifting this fabric, and it was slightly more expensive than most of the stuff they had, but for some reason it just wasn't shifting. So they gave it to us as a project. They said, right, can you work out why this stuff isn't shifting and then develop a strategy to shift it? And we'd been learning about, raise price, you drop volume, and so all of that sort of stuff. And what we decided to do is we put this fabric right in the middle of the department, and we hiked the price. We doubled the price. It shifted in days. The whole lot just went. And, for me, that was a wake-up moment. And that's what's got me on this journey. They can, started to come across people like Peter Clough and other psychologists trying to understand what was going on. And, I just thought, we know what's right. We know what's rational. We know what the right thing to do. We don't do it. And we don't do it so often. It's almost a normal pattern of behaviour.
Well, the economist, I'm pretty sure he's an economist, Dan Arley, has written a great book called Predictably Irrational. How human beings are predictably irrational in so many different ways. And that's all to do with the psychology of things.
I wonder, Paul, I was really interested in what you were saying about that kind of goal-directed behavior is essentially what's linked to reward. Can we therefore manipulate the goal-directed behavior? And I'm thinking of exercise here. I know I played a lot of sport growing up, so I'd been very fit, and then throughout my adult life, you let it go and then you get it back. And whenever you think, right, I'm going to get myself fit again, if you've been fit before, you've always got the advantage that it will come, so you keep going through that really hard bit. Exercise is not much fun when you're not very fit, but actually you start to get a bit of a buzz from it. When you go through that first wind on a jog, that happens after a couple of minutes when you start out, but if you keep going for a few weeks, and it's quite enjoyable. When that happens, are you shifting that goal-directed behavior? Are you getting rewards for things that were previously not rewarded?
Yeah. So there's a number of things that play into this, right? And so when we're talking about behavior change, I like to. I mean, this is where reading your guys the Developing Mental Toughness book. There was so many
available in all good bookshops.
Yes, that's the one. I was just nodding my head vigorously at so many points in reading that. So let's talk about the goal orientation, the achievement orientation, right? So we know that if you want to do successful health behavior change, setting goals is hugely important. But I like to dig a bit deeper. And most people have heard of SMART goals, right? It's got to be specific, it's got to be measurable, it's got to be achievable, it's got to be relevant to me, it's got to be time-based. But I like to get a little bit finer on that. And so for a lot of people, and there'll be people who are listening to this who think, I want to lose weight, I want to get fit, I want to do this, I want to do that. So I always say to them, so write down your goal, whatever it is. And if your goal is more than 3 months away, I want you to write it down on a piece of paper and put it away in a drawer. And you write a goal, a 3-month goal, that will get you towards that big goal. And then I like to say to people, take that 3-month goal and break it down into monthly goals. And then take your monthly goal and break it down into weekly goals. And the reason I talk about this is I used to be a helicopter navigator. And so we'd navigate, we had GPS, but we had backups. You do dead reckoning and do that all throughout training. And you would, if you wanted to get to A to B, you wouldn't just draw a line on the map and just go. You'd have lots of waypoints, as we call them, along the way where you could then check in to see if you're on track or you're off track. And if you're on track, that gives you a good feeling. And if you're off track, you then adjusted to bring yourself back on track, right? So I like to use the natural psychology that we all have about, I'll start Monday, right? I'll start next month. I'll start in spring, summer, right? So we are connected psychologically to weeks, months, seasons, years. So, and I like to take it down into weeks and say, right, so you're going to take that monthly goal and you're going to bring it into weeks. And then you're going to set a process. But every Sunday, the people I work with, they say, just score yourself on how you did that week. Sometimes it'll be a 7, 8, a 9, or 10 out of 10. And you go, that's awesome. What did I do on Monday? What did I do on Tuesday that set me up for a really good week? Sometimes it's a crappy week. It's a 2 or a 3. The wheels come off. And often that's when people throw in the towel. But this is where you just go, you know what? That wasn't great, but I need to just reset tomorrow and I need to make sure that I beat it next week, right? So that achievement orientation, I want to do whatever it takes. But I like to then go process beats goals every day of the week, right? So what are the behaviors that I need to do? And I have this concept of a ritual board. Which is a board, and my initial one was my half of the bathroom mirror when at 40 years old I decided to become a professional boxer. But I had all the things that I needed to do written on that mirror, and I had weekly targets. And so I had some big ones, you know, go and see my old school boxing trainer who used to torture me, go for a run, do some visualization. But I had a whole heap of body weight exercises, right? Things called frogs, which are a little bit like squats, kick sets, stuff like that. And I put weekly targets. I started off with 100, then 200, because I realized that every time I did like 20 or 30, and I'd go and I'd write it on my bathroom mirror, I was getting more motivated. And that was when I had my epiphany about motivation. Motivation follows action, not the other way around. There's too many people who are sitting waiting for the motivation fairy. So many adults still believe in fairies, and the motivation fairy doesn't exist. What we now know from neuroscience, when you are in forwards motion, when you are taking steps towards your goal, however small, the brain releases dopamine, right? And they've done these amazing studies. Anna Huberman talks about this on rats. And when two rats, you know, you put them in this sort of tube and they have to face each other and one backs off. And if one backs off, it's much more likely to lose the next fight, and then lose the next fight and lose the next fight. And the winner is much more likely to win. But if they just take the rat and they push it forward, it actually has a much greater chance of winning. And they find that dopamine is increased in the brain, right? So we know that natural rewards for the brain: food, water, sex, nurturing, and achievement, right? And they all release dopamine that says, that felt good, do it again, right? So this is where I like to have people, they set their goals, and part of your, that whole goal orientation, achievement orientation, I like to give them a tool of breaking that goal down into little parts, breaking it down into the week, and then it's all about the process. And you take track of the process, and you have that, whether it's your bathroom mirror or whether it's on a little board that's on your kitchen, where you see it lots, because every time you see it, it's a trigger to do the behavior, right? So I'm a big fan of visual triggers. So right behind my desk, I have kettlebells and club bells. And whenever I see them, they're a trigger for me to get off my ass and do 30 seconds or a minute of exercise, right? Mm-hmm. So for behavior to happen, we need, this is BJ Fogg's stuff, who's just a guru of behavior change. You need a trigger, you need some level of motivation, and you need the ability to do that. So when you're highly motivated, you do the hard stuff. When you've got low levels of motivation, just do something. And I think that's really critical, because if you just do something every day, you're in forwards motion. And that is going to keep that dopamine going that says, yeah, that's great. And then when you're evaluating, hey, I'm actually starting to make progress, tangible progress towards my goal because I've broken it down into small chunks. That builds self-efficacy, the belief that what I'm doing is making a difference, which, John, you'll know as a sports psychologist is hugely, hugely important.